You know that kind of pain you can't quite explain, but also can't let go of? The kind that you carry without realizing, like an invisible weight on your chest, until, suddenly, it decides to show up at the worst possible moment. Yeah, that's where this story begins. With what's left when love ends, and even worse, when you find out it actually ended a long time ago, you just didn't notice. And before we continue, just a small reminder. If you have a true or almost true story that still keeps you up at night, send it to us. Maybe it deserves to be told here too. Maybe you'll realize you weren't the only one who saw what no one else did. Now, let's talk about the diary. I always thought grief was a clean process. Sad, of course, but predictable. Someone dies, you cry, you miss them, you organize your memories, and then move on. But it's not like that. Grief is more like an old house. You think you've cleaned it all until you find a locked room, and inside, the smell of the past is still alive. That's what happened to me. Julia died on a Thursday. A stupid accident, according to the report. Tire blowout, wet road, head-on collision. She and the other driver died instantly. 2 bodies, 2 families, and a silence that lasted for weeks. In the first few days, I lived on autopilot. Planning the funeral, signing documents, talking to insurance, thanking people for their messages. Everyone said the same things. She's in a better place. Time heals. You need to be strong. But no. One tells you what to do with the objects. The clothes, the letters, the smells. The house seemed to scream her name in every corner. Her perfume on the pillow, her hairbrush, her cup by the sink. It took me weeks to gather the courage to open the closet. And when I finally did, I thought I'd fall apart. Each blouse felt like a frozen piece of a life that no longer existed. That's when I found the box. It was a shoebox wrapped in yellowed tissue paper with the word March scribbled on the lid. I thought it was odd because that was the month we met. I sat on the floor and opened it. Inside were common keepsakes, notes, photos, a beach bracelet. But at the bottom, hidden under a pile of papers, was something that made my heart race, a small black notebook, untitled. It looked like a diary, and it was locked with one of those fragile little keys, more decorative than useful. The problem is, I'd seen that notebook before. She used to write in it every night, sitting on the bed, while I watched TV. When I asked what it was, she'd laugh and say, "Just thoughts." I never insisted. But now she couldn't stop me from reading. I took a pocket knife and pried it open. The first pages were dated 2 years ago. At first, it was all normal work notes, small frustrations, shopping lists. But after a certain page, something changed. The sentences grew shorter, the words sharper, and the name she wrote wasn't mine anymore. It was his. The name was Kaio. Just that. No last name, no explanation. Only Kaio. At first, I tried to convince myself he was a coworker, but the way she wrote left no doubt. Kaio said he dreamed of me again. Today. He held my hand while I talked about the fear of growing old with someone who doesn't see me anymore. I think I finally found what I'd been looking for, even if it destroys everything. I read those lines 20 times. My throat tightened. I didn't know if I felt anger, disgust, or relief. Yes, relief. Because suddenly, everything made sense. The pointless arguments, the distance, the cold excuses, the nights she needed space. She wasn't distant. She was with him. I kept reading. The next pages were practically a confession. Descriptions of meetings, little details, handwritten promises. When all this is over, I want to run away with him. He said he'll tell his wife, but I don't want to be the cause of anyone's pain. Maybe love is that, destroying what's wrong to start over. I had to close the notebook. My head was pounding, and the house felt emptier than ever. I stood up, went to the kitchen, and opened a bottle of wine we'd saved for a special occasion. How ironic, the last bottle she bought. The one we were supposed to open on our anniversary. As the dark red liquid filled the glass, I felt the metallic taste of rage rise in my throat. She had betrayed me. For months, maybe years. And now she was dead, leaving me as the protagonist of a story I didn't even know existed. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came when I closed the diary and realized it didn't end there. The last pages were smudged with ink as if they'd been written in a rush under rain. Or tears. And at the end, there was what looked like an address. 118 Dos Pinheiros Street. A place I'd never heard of. I spent the whole night staring at that piece of paper. I didn't know if it was his address or hers. But I knew one thing. If I didn't go there, I'd never move on. And the next morning, I went. The GPS led me to a narrow street in an old neighborhood where time seemed frozen. Simple houses, rusted gates, low walls. The kind of place where life moves slowly, but secrets never die. Number 118 was near the end of the street. A two-story house with faded paint and heavy curtains. The gate was slightly open. I parked and sat there for a few seconds, just watching. No movement. No sound. But the air felt different, dense, as if I'd crossed an invisible line between what I knew and what I was about to discover. I rang the doorbell. Nothing. I waited a minute or two, then pushed the gate. The metallic creak cut through the silence. I stepped in. The front yard was abandoned tall grass, broken pots, a wooden swing hanging from a frayed rope. There was a smell of damp earth, and something else. Something sour, old. I knocked on the door. No answer, but through the glass, I saw something that froze me, a shadow moving inside. Quickly, as if someone had just stepped away from the window. I took a step back, unsure what to expect. Then a calm male voice came from inside. "You can come in." The door opened with a dry click. The man who appeared wasn't what I expected. He looked about mid-40s, tan skin, unshaven, tired eyes, but there was something strange about him. A quiet kind of serenity, like someone who's carried guilt for a long time and learned to live with it. "You're her husband, aren't you?" he said before I could speak. I froze. How did he know? I hadn't said a word. He looked at me with almost pity. "She told me you'd come one day." I was speechless. The words just vanished from my mouth. He stepped aside to let me in. The inside of the house was simple, almost empty, but everything was too clean, too organized. Every object seemed carefully placed, as if hiding the mess could also hide the past. He led me to a table in the kitchen. 2 glasses, a pot of freshly brewed coffee. Everything was already set, as if he'd been expecting me. "I was going to look for you," he said, sitting down. "But I figured you'd hate me." That sentence hit hard. There was no anger in his voice, only a kind of sadness that felt even heavier than mine. "What happened to her?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He took a deep breath, ran a hand over his face, and looked at me with something that resembled regret. "She didn't die because of me," he said slowly. "But she died because of what we tried to hide." I lost my breath. That sentence sounded like the start of a confession. He stood up, walked to a shelf, and took down a small wooden box. He placed it in front of me. "She asked me to keep this," he said, staring at the floor. "Told me that if you ever came, I should give it to you." I opened it carefully. Inside, there was only a photo. The 2 of them together, smiling. But what caught my eye was what was written on the back, a handwritten note from my wife. "Love isn't a sin, but sometimes it's the punishment." The ground seemed to vanish beneath my feet. I looked at him, and for the first time I saw tears in that man's eyes. He didn't look like the villain in my story. He looked just as lost as I was. "She wanted to tell you," he murmured. "But she never had the courage." Before I could respond, he added, "What you don't know is that she was sick." The silence that followed was so heavy it seemed to fill the whole house. For a moment, I stood frozen, trying to process what he had just said. Sick? That word echoed in my mind, repeating over and over until it lost its meaning. What do you mean? Sick? I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at me for a few seconds before answering. Cancer. Late diagnosis. She found out a few months before. He hesitated. Before the accident, I felt my whole body turn cold. Everything I thought I knew about those months, the absences, the vague messages, the work trips, suddenly took on a new meaning. She never told me, I whispered. I know, he said softly, lowering his eyes. She said she didn't want you to see her like that, that she wanted your last memory of her to be whole. His words cut through me like slow knives, each one slicing away a different part of my anger until only emptiness remained. I sat there, staring at the floor. The distant ticking of a wall clock marked time with cruel precision. I remembered every argument we'd had during that time, the fights over unanswered messages, canceled dinners, the small lies, and now it all seemed so small. And the two of you? I finally asked. What were you really? He sighed, running his fingers through his hair. Friends at first. I taught photography. She wanted to learn. She came on weekends. We talked a lot. Maybe too much. The pause that followed was long enough for me to understand what he didn't say. It happened, he admitted. Once. His honesty disarmed me. There was no excuse, no attempt to soften the truth. Just a man telling it as it was. But to my surprise, I didn't feel hatred. I felt something worse, understanding. Because I knew what it was like to be desperate for someone who saw your flaws and didn't judge you for them. He continued, when she found out about the illness, she wanted to pull away from me too. Said she'd already caused enough pain. He paused. And in a way, she had. There was a raw sadness in his voice that hit me in a way I didn't want to admit. The accident, I began. Was it really an accident? He stayed silent for so long that the clock on the wall seemed to scream. Then finally he said, yes, at least. That's what they said. I looked at him, trying to read between the lines. She left the house alone that night, he continued. Said she was going to see you, but she never made it there. My heart started racing. Are you saying someone? No, he interrupted. I'm saying she was confused, regretful, tired. The way he said tired made me understand. I didn't need to hear the rest. She didn't just die because of the illness. She died because she couldn't bear living torn between guilt and silence anymore. I stood up, feeling the floor tilt beneath me. The house seemed to spin slowly, the air thick and heavy. He didn't try to stop me from leaving. He only said, in a voice that sounded more like a prayer, I'm sorry. I opened the door and walked to my car without looking back. The cold wind on that street cut my face, but I barely felt it. On the passenger seat, I left the photo he had given me. I couldn't take it with me. It wasn't my memory to carry. I started the car, but just sat there, engine running, not knowing where to go. The anger was gone. The hatred, the suspicion, everything had dissolved. All that was left was a void so deep it felt like it occupied the seat beside me. Finally, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the house growing smaller as I drove away. And I realized that the loudest sound silence can make is the one made by everything left unsaid. 3 days later, I still hadn't slept properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, not the woman who left, but the woman I failed to see while she was still here. Her things were still in the house. The clothes, the books, the perfume forgotten on the bathroom shelf. It's strange how someone's scent can outlive their presence. That morning, I opened her laptop. I'd never had the courage to do that before, but something pushed me. Maybe the need to understand. Or maybe the hope of finding one last explanation. The screen lit up slowly, revealing the usual mess. Icons everywhere, untitled folders, scattered notes. But there was something different. An old notification, almost faded by time. Scheduled email, delivery delayed. I clicked it. The subject line was simple. If I don't come back. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen, too afraid to open it. But I had to. So I took a deep breath and clicked. The message began like this. If you're reading this, it's because somehow, time was faster than me. I don't know how much I have left, and I don't want this to sound like a goodbye. But there are things I need to say because maybe, only then, you'll forgive me and forgive yourself too. Her words flowed softly, almost serenely, as if she knew I'd be reading them exactly like this. Broken, tired, trying to make sense of the senseless. I lied. Lying was the only way I could keep smiling around you. I didn't want the illness to become the center of our lives. And I didn't want guilt to make you stay, when deep down you were already half gone. A knot formed in my stomach. She knew. She had always known. I don't blame you. Sometimes love is just that, staying as long as you can. And you stayed as long as you could. So did I. The tears came before I even noticed. She always had that gift, saying what hurt without ever needing to raise her voice. About what happened with him, I don't hate you for it. It was confusing, it was wrong, but it was also human. No one is just the mistake they made. I was a coward. He was needy, you were distracted. And in the end, we were all just trying to survive something. I closed my eyes. The sound of the wind outside mixed with the ticking of the wall clock, as if time itself were mocking me. If I could ask for one last thing, it would be this. Live lightly. Don't carry what isn't yours. And don't try to fix what's already been said. Just keep going. One day, when the sun rises and you look out the window, you'll feel that somehow I'm still there, not to haunt you, but to remind you that, even in the end, I loved you. The email ended without a signature. No date, no farewell. Just the blinking cursor, as if waiting for my reply. I sat there, staring at the screen until the light started to sting my eyes. And then I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of finally understanding. I closed the laptop and for the first time since the accident, opened every window in the house. Cold air rushed in, mixing with the faint scent of her perfume. And for a moment, I swear I felt a light presence, almost imperceptible, brush past me. It wasn't sadness. It was just the end. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning too. 2 days later, Enrique's phone buzzed at 2 a.m. He was lying still, staring at the ceiling. He hadn't slept properly since the confession. He grabbed the phone out of reflex without thinking. It was a message from Livia. You told her, didn't you? The blue light from the screen lit up the dark room. Enrique stared at those words for long minutes, his heart pounding in his throat. Yes, he had told her. Not out of courage, but because Larva had found out first. Another message appeared. She called me. Said the first destroyed a family. But we only lived what you wanted. He didn't reply. There was no right answer. Not for her, not for him. He tossed the phone onto the nightstand and got up. He walked to the kitchen, turned on the cold light, and stood in front of the sink, staring at his own reflection in the window glass. The face staring back at him looked like a stranger's, tired, older, the kind of man he swore he'd never become. Outside, the street slept. But inside his head, the noise was deafening. Words spoken, promises broken, silences piling up. He opened his work email, just to distract his mind, and there it was, an automatic reminder of an old hotel booking from the same weekend it had all started. That single notification destroyed him. It was just a confirmation email, but it screamed from the screen. You lied. Enrique deleted everything. Messages, photos, history. But there's no delete key for memory. What's been said, what's been done, keeps echoing in the chest like a sound that never fully fades. When the sun began to rise, he was still there, sitting, motionless with his phone turned off and his head in his hands. For the first time, he realized that losing Lara was the least of his punishments. 3 weeks later, Laura agreed to have coffee with him. Not because she wanted to get back together, but because she needed to understand. She needed to hear from his own mouth why. They chose a small cafe downtown, where the noise of the street could mask the awkwardness. Enrique arrived first. He ordered a black coffee and stirred it without drinking. When Lavra walked in, he noticed how different she looked. Not because of her hair or her clothes, but because of her eyes. It was the look of someone who had already cried all there was to cry, and now just wanted to move on. "I didn't come here to fight," she said softly. "I came to understand." Enrique took a deep breath. He wanted to say 1,000 things, that he was sorry, that he didn't know what he was doing, that he felt empty. But what came out was simply, "I ruined everything." Lavra stayed silent for a while. Then she set her cup down and looked straight at him. "No, Enrique. You just showed who you really were all along." He looked away. She stood, placed some bills on the table and said, "I hope one day you can forgive yourself." "I've already started to." And then she left, just like that. No drama, no tears. Only the sound of the door closing behind her. Enrique sat there, staring at the cold coffee, the empty chair. For a moment, he wanted to run after her, say something, ask for one last chance. But he understood there was no more room for words. That afternoon, he realized something he'd never understood before. Betrayal doesn't end when the other person leaves. It keeps living inside the one who betrayed, like a mirror that never reflects the same image again. In the end, no story of betrayal is just about deceit. It's about what's left when the truth comes out, and there's nowhere left to run from it. Because love, contrary to what they say, doesn't die suddenly. It fades slowly, one forgetfulness at a time. One dinner without conversation. One touch that no longer happens. And it's in that silence that people lose themselves the most. When affection still exists, but habit becomes the only bond holding it together. Sometimes betrayal doesn't begin with another person. It begins with the lack of courage to admit that something is over. It begins with the fear of being alone, or the vanity of still feeling desired. But what truly destroys, what really leaves a scar, is what's left unsaid. The swallowed words, the apologies that never came, the gestures frozen in time. The truth is, we've all betrayed someone. A lover, a friend, or even our own hope of being better. And we've all been betrayed too. Because living means dealing with imperfections that collide against each other. But there's something time teaches us, even if it hurts the most. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give to someone else. It's a breath you allow yourself. To forgive isn't to forget. It's to move forward, even while remembering. The story of Enrique and Lavra, of guilt, loss, and redemption, could belong to any of us. Because no one walks away from love unscathed. And in the end, what truly remains isn't what was said, nor what was hidden, but what was felt. So if you're hearing this now, and there's someone you still need to forgive, or ask forgiveness from, maybe now's the time. Not to go back, but to finally move on. Because true love isn't the one that never fails. It's the one that survives regret. And when silence finally comes, may it no longer hurt. May it bring peace. Until the next story.